So when I was coming to Atlanta First, I knew there would be so many fun things to do, and I knew that there would be challenges and adventure. What I never could have imagined 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, when I was first appointed to Atlanta First, is how the movie industry would suddenly explode in Georgia. We're working along. I'm getting to know the church. Church is getting to know me. We're kind of working through some challenges and opportunities, and then one day someone calls and says, "Hey, I'm a location scout." I didn't know what a location scout was. And they said, "We got this movie that we're getting ready to film called Joyful Noise. Couple actors that you might know of, Dolly Parton, Queen Latifah. And we'd like to come look at your church and see if we can use it." Okay. Well, there you have it. So you go to trustees and you say, do we want to do this? And the first question that good church folks ask is, well, are we going to make any money off of it? We got this old building with fabric falling from the ceiling. Maybe if we, And yes, they pay. It's not, you're not going to get rich off of it. But yeah, they pay to use your space, and often they leave it better than they found it. So let's figure this out. So this huge team of people come and they start taking pictures, and they wanted a pastor study. And I showed them my office, and they said, "That's great, but that won't work." Had no idea. Well, this is the pastor study. We went in the library and they looked at it, and the art director and the producers and the folks that were here, they go, "Wow, I think this would be exactly what we need." Okay. So then they send over a location agreement, and you're reading through legalese, and your head's spinning, and they say, "Well, we're going to need to come in and we're going to build out the space, and we'll have some trucks and we'll have some people." So a buddy of mine from high school has been in movie production, and we'd connected over Facebook, and I sent him a message. He said, "You will understand this the first time you get to do this, but you cannot imagine what is getting ready to descend upon your church. You have no way to imagine what it's going to take to film these one or two scenes that they're going to film." And Jim was right. The day came, and first the carpenters came to make the library into a pastor's study. And suddenly the carpenters came, and the electricians came, and the set dressers came, and they began to transform it. And we were amazed. And then the day of filming came, and this entire parking lot was full of trucks. Porter Place was closed down. Portable air conditioners were put in place. Diesel generators on both sides of the building. Huge trucks and people. A miniature city moved in beside us. And suddenly, Atlanta was Hollywood. And it was an amazing experience. Now, there were so many lessons along the way, and we've now had Joyful Noise film here, and an episode of Drop Dead Diva, and scenes for the motion picture Flight. We've been scouted for other movies since, and we know some of the location managers and location scouts, and they're real good to kind of come by and check on us from time to time. So today what I want to talk about is kind of what that first experience was like, and how quickly I realized how many people it takes to make a movie. Now, movie making in Georgia is nothing new. We've been making movies and television shows in Georgia for many, many years. My childhood growing up in the 70s, two of what I think are still the funniest movies that I've ever seen were filmed in Georgia: Smokey and the Bandit 1, Smokey and the Bandit 2. In Smokey and the Bandit 2, most of you who are from Atlanta will remember the old Greyhound at the Lakewood Fairgrounds, the wooden roller coaster that had been deemed unsafe to ride, and all the movie folks needed to know was that it needed to be blown up. Now, see, this was back when when stunts were still a part of movies. Pretty much every stunt you see in a movie now is CGI, computer graphics. Very few stunt people left in Hollywood anymore. All the risk managers kind of got rid of all that. And they blew up the Greyhound, and that scene was captured for Smoking the Bandit 2. In the Heat of the Night was filmed out in Covington, and all these movies along the way that were filmed in part or in whole in Georgia, in the city of Atlanta. Now there's a whole industry. Now people are starting businesses just to cater to the needs of the film industry. The most recent news this past week is it's not just movies, but it's television, and it's not just television, but it's like home improvement. Any of y'all like to watch Drew and Jonathan Scott, the Property Brothers? Anybody at home? There, we got a couple people in here. So Drew, unbeknownst to me, and Shannon and I would have been all over this. Drew and Jonathan Scott had been in Atlanta for about the last 6 or 9 months, and this week in the Atlanta paper was one of the homes that they had helped to renovate, and those guys just do awesome work. Plus, we found out yesterday morning that Drew and Jonathan Scott are twins, and just like Shannon, who's an identical twin, they had an older brother, and when they were due, their parents didn't know they were having twins. Same case with Shannon. So after having seen an interview with Drew and Jonathan, Shannon believes they should come do our house just because they have this incredible bond as twins. So she's going to write them and try to figure that out. Let me read for you. I've preached from this text before in a slightly different context, but in Paul's letter to the church in Corinth, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and we'll just begin in verse 27. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it, and God has appointed in the church first apostles, second prophets, third teachers, deeds of power, gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? But strive for the greater gifts, and I will show you a still more excellent way. So Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, and they're all arguing with each other as to who's more important than the other. And that's the bottom line. Is I know church folks never do that, but back then church folks would argue about just about anything. And apparently at this point, they were trying to determine who had the greater spiritual gifts, who was more important in the life of the church. Now, I don't know about y'all, I've never been one to really get starstruck, but I've always been interested in celebrities and people who have become stars. There's certain people I've just always wanted to sit down with. Didn't want their autograph, didn't necessarily need my picture made with them. I just was interested in understanding what made them click. What was it about them that got them to that point? And I'm still that way. I never will forget, though, the day we were all kind of hanging out waiting for our first sign of a star. And in walked Dolly Parton. And even on her big old hill, she was still a bit shorter than me. Those that were here at the time remember our associate, Jasmine Smothers, she's a very petite woman as well. And I can't remember the pictures whether one was taller than the other. Dolly Parton was an absolute hoot. She came in here with one of her people, and I thought this was cool. Have any of y'all ever been to the Grand Ole Opry, the Ryman Auditorium? A handful of you. So apparently, when Dolly Parton walked in here, she told her friend, "This reminds me of the Ryman." I guess the wood and the way it's laid out, and what was our nursery and what we've kind of recently cleaned up and renovated was where was her kind of green room. And she would hang out in there in between scenes, and all the scenes were taking place down in the church library. Queen Latifah was as beautiful a person as I've ever seen. Her skin was absolutely impeccable, but she was just very quiet and very she was very much an introvert. Not in a bad way. She just was very quiet. Also, Keke Palmer, who's come up through the Disney ranks and is a young woman, young actress. And then Courtney Vance. Courtney Vance is Angela Bassett's husband. And I stood in the hall for an hour talking to Courtney Vance. It was surreal. We're talking about church and talking about children. And we were talking about what we hope for and dream for our children. And as we're in the midst of this conversation, and I'm talking about Zach playing baseball and soccer and going to church and doing all those things, he says, yeah, Angela was at lunch with Jada the other day, and Jada's trying to talk Angela to getting our kids into the movies, and I told Angela that ain't just happening. And I thought, he's talking about Jada Smith like I talk about Bob and Sally. Angela had been at lunch with Jada, and they were comparing notes as to what their children were doing. Mr. Vance was incredibly grounded. I talk about those three because those are the ones that those four, they were who you saw on the screen. But it was the people behind the scenes who were so amazing. I don't know about y'all, but I've always liked to stay kind of to the end of a movie and watch the credits roll. But if you like to watch the credits roll, you're probably like me that at some point, once they get through all of the people who are actually on screen, you kind of lose focus and lose interest. I promise you, when I go to see a movie now, I stay till the very end of the credits because, first of all, now I recognize some of those names. And secondly, I understand that the further you go, the deeper you go into those credits, quite frankly, the more important the people are. So let's start with our location scout friends. So there's people whose job it is to go around and figure out where a movie's going to film. So the artistic director, the director, the producers will say, hey, we've got a scene and it needs to be a pastor's office. So we want it to kind of look old school. We want paneling or books or, kind of set in this period. And we would like for a desk and Bibles and a robe or hanging in the corner. And these location scouts then go and start visiting places and trying to find places that meet that criteria. And they come and they take pictures and they leave you their card and they say, we'll be back in touch. Days and weeks go by and you haven't heard a thing. And then suddenly one day it's, hey, we're going to bring a little caravan by. And in that caravan are all the people who would have to make that scene happen. And they're measuring and taking more pictures and looking around. And then the day of the production, as I've said, these trucks roll up. And then you have a location manager who manages everything. And so one of the most difficult jobs that I've seen are these location managers whose responsibility is to get roads closed down, permits for parking, permits for what's going on inside the building, making sure that everything gets set up and that when everything gets taken down, like I said, it's either as good or better than it was when they found it. So they rolled in, they started making what they call a wild wall. And this is something we'll handle in the next couple of sermons on perspective. But it never occurred to me when I've watched a movie, and most of y'all are smarter than I am, that when I'm watching a scene and I see the scene from both sides, I always wondered why I couldn't see the camera on the other side. I mean, if they're filming from both directions, why can't I see the camera? Well, that's why they call it movie magic, because they film the entire scene from one direction. And then it's called flipping the scene. They move the camera to the other side and film the entire scene from the other direction. If you see a movie that has multiple camera angles in the same scene, they've shot that scene 20 or 30 takes from each separate camera angle. So the amount of people required to kind of coordinate that and do all that is amazing. So the location scout found the location manager got everything set up, and then the artistic folks, the electricians, and the carpenters and the set dressers, they all come in and they get the scene ready. And then you got to light it, and that's another thing we'll address, light. Light is such an important part of our Christian faith. We use light to talk about so many things. But lighting is critical, and sound is critical. And so all of these people. Now, how many of you have ever seen the title grip you look at a grip? Well, grip kind of is a generic term that means a lot of different things, and it can be more specific, but there's the skilled craftsmen, and they support so much of what's going on the set. The movement of the cameras and lighting and mechanical rigging, all the things that are required to make that things go from a kind of a functional perspective. The grips do that. And then I always saw this a best boy grip. And I always wondered what that meant. So apparently it has its origin back in the early days of movie making. And if one group in a movie needed somebody to help from another department, so if the electricians maybe needed someone from carpentry, they'd say, "Send me your best boy. I need his help." And now the best boy, if it's the best boy grip, is kind of the second in command. They're the best person for the job behind the person in charge. A key grip. Now this was fascinating to me. Most of you know that along the way, I've managed to find my way in the midst of a scene for flight. And it was outdoors in Covington, and the sun's coming over, and you're shooting the same scene 30 or 40 times in the course of a day, but you want all the shadows to look exactly the same, or for there to be no shadows at all. So part of the responsibility of a key grip is to make sure the lighting remains consistent. So for us in flight in that field in Covington, there was a huge crane with a huge white filter. And all day that filter moved slowly across the sky to filter the sunlight so that everything looked consistent from the time we began shooting at 9 o'clock in the morning until the time we wrapped at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. There are gaffers the lighting technicians. But then there's directors, producers, drivers, editors, electricians, carpenters, extras, actors, the lawyers, the accountants, the makeup. And then there's craft services. Craft services is my favorite part. They're the people who provide the snacks to the cast and crew. And the craft services that have been here, man, I mean, they roll up a van and they open the doors, and in the front are just those old-timey machines that you'd go get like gum out, but you don't have to put money in them. You just go and you twist out some M&Ms or some gum or some whatever you want. Now, I was a total geek when I was on the set of Flight, and I got the privilege of meeting Don Cheadle, and my cast chair was next to Don Cheadle's cast chair. It's very surreal, kind of weird to even talk about. But during one of our breaks, I went over to Craft Services and I grabbed some lemon heads because I could, and it was fun. So I opened up my lemon heads and I popped a couple of lemon heads, and Cheadle taps me on the shoulder and says, "Hey, can I get a couple of those?" So I'm over here texting Shannon, "I'm sharing lemon heads with Don Cheadle." I had a very similar conversation with Don Cheadle that I had with Courtney Vance about family and children and raising children in this crazy era. And again, it was surreal. But it was all those other people who worked so hard and were so gifted and so talented. And I will tell you this, and maybe it's because they were working with a church or because they were around a preacher, but some of the most genuine, respectful, hardworking, talented individuals I've ever had the privilege of getting to know. They love their craft. They love what they do. One of the craft services young men that was here on Joyful Noise, I got to talking to him one day, and you learn that this is kind of what happens, is that people kind of get in however they can get in. And his goal was to be a camera operator. But he knew that if he would get on set and work hard and do good work, that he would eventually get noticed and make his way up. So he had joined Craft Services. And he was working to be the very best at Craft Services that he could possibly be. And he said, if all I ever am is Craft Services, I get to work in the movie industry and I get to be a part of movies that make millions and sometimes change the way we look at things. He said, but if I work really hard and I do everything right, then I might get noticed and I might work my way up and become all that I wanted to be. Now, it's not a far stretch, and this isn't rocket science this morning, but what we've learned from Hollywood when we observe the teams that descend upon a site where they're going to be filming is that every single person plays a critical role. If every single person isn't in their position when they need to be, performing the task for which they've been trained, for which they've been gifted, if every person is not in the right space at the right time doing what it is that they're required to do, then it will never look the way it's supposed to look. You know, I ran some figures in my head, just rough figures, and it's impossible to figure out what these things cost, but I suspect in Joyful Noise, that there were 3 scenes that ended up in Joyful Noise that were shot in our library that probably comprised a grand total of 3 or 4 minutes of the entire movie. And I suspect if you were to prorate salaries of everybody and what they paid to transform the set and all the things that went into that, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars for that one 3 or 4 minute segment. It's amazing to think about. And hundreds of people who had their hands in that one scene. These people are amazing. And it's hard for me now to look at movies kind of the same way because, as I've said, I know some of those folks. When you hear news, you hear it in a different way. When they lost the primary actor in Fast and the Furious to the accident, there were some of the same location people who had worked on movies at Atlanta First were on that movie. And then when the young woman was killed on the train trestle, filming the movie about the Allman Brothers, you could kind of hear the murmur go through the community because they're a tight-knit community. They support and encourage one another, and when one gets hired to a movie, they bring along their friends, the people that they trust to work alongside them. And so I think it's a great privilege to have been able to kind of see behind the curtain, if you will, to see these folks work hard. And you know, it's interesting. I talked about being starstruck, and in many ways, the folks on the set just get used to seeing all these folks. And so when they come here and they'll say, "Well, it's who's in the movie?" "Well, so and so and so," and they just rattle it off. We almost got a movie with Sir Anthony Hopkins, which would have been pretty cool. I just wanted him to say Clarice one time for me. Thought that would be awesome. He probably wouldn't have. They just kind of rattle off these names. But part of it is they're so confident and comfortable with who they are, and they know their role, and they play it well. Grateful for the friendships that I've developed. But for us this morning, as we think back to Paul's word to the Corinthians, the church is trying to come together. And while we're not trying to make a movie, we are trying to change lives. Each of us plays a vital, important role. I get to stand up here on Sunday mornings and be in front of people. But there are so many people behind the scenes, far more important than I, that if not for them, the work of the church would not carry on. I'm privileged that I get to stand here and do what I do. But I'm grateful for those who stand behind me and with me and around me so that we all can do what it is that God has called us to do. So what have we learned from Hollywood this morning? We learned that everyone is important. Everyone has a gift, and each person must use that gift so that the final product can be exactly what God created it to be. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.